if this works. Okay, we're live. Hi, this is William Ramsey. Welcome to William Ramsey Investigates. On today's show, I have a very special guest, a returning guest. His name is Charles Upton, and we talked about 3 months ago about a book, a fascinating book about the UFO phenomenon titled The Alien Disclosure Deception, The Metaphysics of Social Engineering. And you can go back and listen to that. Very well-received discussion. But he just published a book, June 21st, 2022, about a subject I'm interested in. And you can tell that Charles has years of study and understanding of this really global religion. He knows very important people. Houston Smith, some people might have heard his name. He was a compiler of kind of global religions. But the title of this book that he just published is The Way Forward for Perennialism, after the Antinomianism of Frithjof Schuon. And his other titles are The System of Antichrist, Truth and Falsehood in Postmodernism and the New Age. Also, Vectors of the Counter-Tradition, The Course and Destiny of Inverted Spirituality.
Counter-initiation, actually. So.
Counter-initiation, sorry. And then also Dugin Against Dugin, Traditionalist Analysis of the Fourth Political Theory. And some of the names that we talked about last time popped up in this book too. Renan, and so Gwenon, sorry. And some of these other people who influenced Frithjof Schuon. But Charles can talk more about that. I tried to get through this. There's a lot of knowledge. You can see a lot of wisdom in this book, but I'm glad to have him back. So Charles Upton, welcome back to the show.
Glad to be back. And this book has been a long time coming. It was about to be published a year ago. Then a bunch of other stuff happened. Probably COVID was part of it, and so which I didn't get. But we all got it one way or another.
So can you you said you've studied this character who's in the title, Frithjof Schuon, for 35 years. Maybe just some terminology. What is your definition of perennialism? What's the differences of perennialist thought, traditionalist? And why did you feel like half of this book is a critique of Schuon? So you see his beneficial metaphysics, but also you don't agree with some of his things. But maybe that's a long question. But maybe you can just start with some basic definitions. Who is Schuon? What is perennialism?
Yes, I will do that as long as I have to unplug my phone, which I already unplugged. And now it's ringing, and I don't know how that happens. You unplug the phone, it rings. Okay. Well, perennialism, in the simplest way to say it, it's the belief that God has sent more than one divine revelation to the human race over the long history of religion, and that more than one of these can be in force at the same time. In other words, perennialists don't say, well, now that Islam has come, all the other religions are invalid, or as Christians have said, now that Christianity has come, all the earlier religions are invalid. We don't quite say that. That's one part of it, but it has to be clearly differentiated from certain things which this might remind you of. The religions cannot be syncretized. We don't do syncretism, which means you don't take bits and pieces of different religions and throw them together and try to make, a nice jigsaw, picture that's bigger and more interesting than each of the religions combined, each of the religions by itself, considering each of them has part of the truth, but the others have other parts of the truth, and you put it all together and you get the whole truth. And that's syncretism, and that's not what perennialism, as I follow it, is after. Perennialism, as Frithjof Schuon said, and I must say, I'm not simply criticizing Frithjof Schuon. I do have criticisms, but I use his ideas at every point in my book as well, because I think he, achieved some wonderful things in his metaphysics. And Frithjof Schuon says, each religion contains all religion, or all the religions, or let's say all religion, because the truth is one. So every religion is its own particular form, but that form contains everything the human being needs for the spiritual life, if you know how to find everything that's within that form, which is not necessarily easy. but it can be done. And all of the religions are ways back from the multiplicity of existence on this earth to the unity of God. And the paths they take are discrete and they can't be mixed, but they're all going to the same goal, because they have all originally been created by or sent out by that one absolute reality. And so each of them in its own way is a way of return to that absolute reality. So that's what perennialism is in a nutshell. Now, there are different ideas. There is a perennialism which is associated with the name Aldous Huxley and Gerald Hurd. And this is not quite what the traditionalist school, who are perennialists, are doing. It's similar, but it has definite differences and certain drawbacks from the traditionalist standpoint. Now, the traditionalist school itself, I should say perennialism, it's been around perhaps forever. It's similar to the Hindu idea of the Sanatana Dharma, the primordial religion. There are passages in the Quran that are entirely in line with perennialism. It says, we accept the other revelations, which at this point were Judaism, Christianity, and Sabaeanism, which might or might not be what we call Zoroastrianism now. And, we accept these revelations and as valid. So that's in the Quran. There are other passages which seem to contradict that, but that's another issue, and it gets a little involved. But anyway, there are Renaissance philosophers like Marsilio Ficino and Pico della Mirandola, who basically wrote from a perennialist perspective. The religion Manichaeism was a perennialist religion. I mean, it had elements from Zoroastrianism and Buddhism and Christianity. On the other hand, it had the drawback of being pretty syncretistic. So you could call it a perennialist religion from a certain standpoint, but from another way, it does not fulfill what I consider to be the real definition of perennialism, which says that each religion is unique and complete in itself and gives the believer everything he or she needs to live the spiritual life. So anyway, the traditionalist school of perennialism, or of comparative metaphysics or comparative religion, essentially is considered to have been founded by a French philosopher, René Guénon, who died around 1950, maybe 51, I forget the exact year. Another sometimes considered to be co-founder was Ananda Kentish Kumaraswamy, who was an Anglo-Indian historian of traditional art from Sri Lanka, who ended up writing on metaphysics as well. And other names in this school are Titus Burckhardt, Martin Lings, Marco Paulus, and the most prominent figure in this traditionalist school after Guénon passed away was Frithjof Schuon, who passed away, I believe, in 1998. And he did an amazing work in his many books of bringing the deepest truths of metaphysics right out to anyone who can follow his writings. They're a little difficult, but they're not as hard as Guénon, I'll have to say. So he started. He actually, his path was Sufism, and he basically his Sufi sheikh, or his Sufi leader, sheikh is essentially the Sufi word for guru, what we call a guru, pretty much, was a Sheikh Ahmed Al-Alawi of Algeria. And
And that's your tradition as well. Your
Yeah,
tradition.
that's my lineage as well. So after I got what I could from Schuon, I said, let's see what it looks like if I go toward where he got it from. There are questions though about whether he actually was faithful to that tradition, because he was very creative and went off on his own and developed his own form of spirituality, which might or might not be legitimately called Sufism. In any case, Schuon did an amazing thing. I mean, if you're, there's one guy, we used to have my wife and I, a little study group on Frithjof Schuon with one or two people, and when we lived in California, there's one guy who was a high school teacher and a young guy, and he just loved these books, and he said, these are like the cliff notes for metaphysics. I don't know if people still know the term cliff notes. Those little pamphlets.
I remember it. I don't know if the younger people do.
Yeah,
like the little yellow books.
But if you don't want to read all of War and Peace, you get War and Peace for Dummies, in this pamphlet, and then you can figure out how to write a book report without actually reading the book. That's what they were. But they sort of. It's certainly not metaphysics for dummies, but it is metaphysics made simple in some ways. Not everybody would agree with that, but there's so much in those books that at least for me, they just completely changed my perspective on reality. It was an amazing effect. I mean, no writer has influenced me like Frithjof Schuon. And what's interesting is, having gone through what at the time was called the spiritual revolution of the 1960s, where not only was there sex, drugs, rock and roll, LSD, and all of this, but all these religions and belief systems were being thrown at everybody. Eastern religions, Hinduism, Buddhism, Western mysticism, Native American spirituality, people were involved in, which was finally, resulted in Carlos Castaneda and all this. And what's interesting, you look at Schuon, these were his interests too. He was interested,
he kind of predated the whole 60s movement, right?
Well, he was going along parallel to it, but he didn't know about it. I mean, I as far as I can tell, he just dismissed all those hippies. He was not interested in what they were doing. He probably thought they were deviant, But then you look at it from another standpoint, and there were a lot of similarities. I mean, drugs and rock and roll, no. Sex, yeah. Elements of sort of a spiritual eroticism, in his method of teaching. And he was, like the hippies, he had problems with organized religion, even though, he spoke highly of orthodoxy. He also was very uncomfortable with it because he very much wanted his own independence. He didn't like popes telling him what to do and things like this. He was very close to the Native Americans. He was initiated into the Sioux tribe, and I believe either the Crow or the Blackfoot, but definitely the Sioux. And certainly interested in Eastern religion, certainly interested in Western mysticism.
And he had extraordinary output too.
He
was putting out book and book and book.
He wrote a library of books,
Yeah. So on a lot of religion. So he was kind of before Huston Smith. I think Huston Smith ended up writing an intro to one of his books, but he had an interesting background. He went from Switzerland. I think his mom was French, and then ended up in the States. And the latter part of that.
Yeah, in Indiana, Bloomington, Indiana, where some of his followers still reside. And when he more or less retired, he retired at a point of certain scandals because he had, he had a guru meltdown of the classic form that we're so used to nowadays. And, that there were, because he held nude dance events. And of course, that's going to create, if you want to ask for it, you could just say, I am a Muslim and a Sufi sheikh, and yet I run nude dance events. That doesn't quite gel, So I'm not saying that he was necessarily corrupt. I'm simply saying he was rather unwise, to say the least. And so after that, there were scandals and people, some people quit. And he basically, he retired, and he said his major representatives, well, now you're all sheikhs, I'm retiring. So Martin Lings in England ran a branch of his Mariamia Tarika, it's called, a Sufi order, for a while, although he was already quite advanced in years and died soon after Schuon. And then the one follower of Schuon who is still alive and still teaching is Sayyid Hossein Nasr, an Iranian who has lived in this country for quite a while. He was part of the government of the Shah of Iran before the revolution, and then of course he had to skedaddle, and he skedaddled to George Washington University in DC, where he's been teaching religion ever since. So, and he's done himself some wonderful works on the history of Sufism and various aspects of Islam. So this got a lot of us. And who are us? I think there were more than, gotta have been more than one person who went through the spiritual revolution of the 60s and the hippie thing, who ended up saying, well, this is perfect. Now I'm middle-aged, if not getting elderly, and I can't party as hardy as I used to, but I don't want to lose touch with some of the things that I saw or was exposed to in those years. And so this seems like a much more elevated, intellectually rigorous, and neater kind of approach to some of the same themes. It turned out not to be as neat as we thought just reading the books, but that's a whole other story. So.
But Schoen's real benefit, you say, your central insight is the TUR. Transcendent unity religion.
Yeah, the transcendent unity religions, and I forget if Guénon used that phrase, but he had this essentially the same concept. But I think the phrase itself is from Schuon, and it's basically, the way I interpret that is saying, okay, we all have some idea of the unity of religions, and the interfaith movement tends to say the religions need to be united in some way, however clearly or vaguely they define this. Because if the religions are united, there'll be less conflict between religious communities, which I think we're just now seeing the idea that if we can have a single global system that will unite everybody, this will prevent conflict. No. I think the war in the Ukraine is the refutation, the permanent refutation of that idea, because there are going to be differences, and the differences have to be allowed for, and they can't be glossed over in for the purpose of everybody getting along. So basically, we understand unity of religions. What's a transcendent unity of religions? What makes it transcendent? Well, it is true that if you look into the mystical centers, and I would consider the mystical or the metaphysical to be the center, intellectually speaking anyway, of all of the religions. And if you get into the mystical centers of the religions, the doctrines get to be more and more alike. For example, the Hindus have a doctrine of, Brahman is their word for, God as absolute reality. And there's Saguna Brahman, which means Brahman with attributes. There's Nirguna Brahman, which means Brahman without attributes. This is exactly the same as in Sufism. Allah is God with attributes, because Allah is the synthesis of all the names of God. And Allah without attributes would be, God without attributes would be Al-Zat, which means the unknowable absolute essence of God. And that's exactly the same as God versus Godhead in Christianity. and perhaps in Kabbalah, the Sephiroth, the seven, emanated aspects of God versus the Ein Sof, which is the unknowable essence of God. It's exactly the same doctrine appears in almost every religion, even in the Lakota and even in the Sioux religion, where God is equivalent to Wakantanka as father, and Godhead is equivalent to Wakantanka as grandfather. Exactly the same doctrine. But when you look at the totality of the religions, they never become identical. Each religion has its own, essential quality. I mean, Christianity has to be Trinitarian, even though, it accepts that God is one, credo in unum Deum. I believe in one God, but God manifests or is understood as Trinitarian, which is a difficult mystery in Christianity, but that there it is. Whereas in Islam, God is purely one, and Trinitarianism is frowned upon, except certain Sufi writers like Ibn Arabi have a kind of Trinitarianism, not the same as the Christian, but So anyway, but in other words, the religions never become one. They never become equivalent to each other because each it's its own particular quality and essence and methodology and appealing to or existing to serve or existing to guide a particular kind of human being. Usually, traditionally, the different kinds of human beings were separated by ethnic group, by nation, by language. Now things are getting more mixed up. So more people can, somebody like me can look at Islam and say, I need the simplicity of the divine unity. And even though I don't know Arabic and I've never been to the Mideast, I can still do that because, lots of different kinds of people are being thrown together in this world. So the religions become, various spiritual possibilities that you choose, not simply the religion you were born into, which is what it almost always was. They never become the same. So you're seeing the growing similarity of the different doctrines when you get closer to the mystical center of the different religions. That proves the unity of the religions. But the fact that they never become perfectly the same shows that unity is transcendent. That you never get, to a big meta religion that somebody might do a theology based upon a syncretistic theology based upon all the different religions and come up with one big religion. That is disallowed because the religions are unique, which means they only meet in God, in the absolute. They meet beyond comparison. God is beyond comparison. He's beyond compare. He is the unique, and the uniqueness of the religions meet only in the uniqueness and the transcendence of God.
Right.
So
they all get to that point where you learn all those things, and then you're into metaphysics, mystery, the unknowable, and they all end up at that same spot, right?
Well, it's an unknowable. Is it unknowable?
Well,
we also talk. The Sufis talk about ma'rifah, which is knowledge. And there's ma'rifat Allah, which is the knowledge of God, and then supposedly a deeper knowledge is ma'rifat nafs, which is the knowledge of the self. And strangely enough, the Hindus have a very similar distinction. They have Brahma Vidya, which is knowledge of God, and Atma Vidya, which is knowledge of the self. They have that as well. So can you know it? Well, the little me, trying to look and see, let's see, can I know God? Let's imagine God. I think I can figure God out. No, you can't. God is infinitely beyond anything you can possibly imagine. And yet the knowledge of God is not just closed. It's very strange. The Sufis say no one knows Allah but Allah, but there's a mysterious way that you can arrive at God's knowledge of himself in you, whatever that may mean. So it's not like you can't know God, but it's like you can't encompass God. You can't sit back here as your little self saying, I can figure out what this infinite reality is. You cannot do that. Yet there is a knowledge that comes at some point. And the question is that my knowledge or is that God's knowledge? You know?
Right. So you have similarities, unanimity at the very top of these, maybe the great three religions, even including Hinduism. Certain similarities, but you also, I think you said that even the kind of exoterization of the esoteric kind of can fall under Guénon's definitions of a pseudo tradition or counter tradition, right? So in some ways, what I mean by that is that some of this esoteric stuff that becomes knowledgeable can also be misinterpreted.
Right? Oh yeah, I mean the whole idea of the esoteric doctrines are for the few and they're to be kept under wraps, and they're clean, don't blab about the mysteries. Well, the fact that they can be and very often have been misinterpreted with terrible consequences is the reason that seal is put on the mysteries. On the other hand, since the 60s, and everybody dropped acid, the seal has been broken. Now, you can't say don't blab about esoteric mysteries because every kind of blabbing that could possibly be conceived of has been done. So what we have to do is try to get it right and also try, to understand that whatever we say or whatever we believe, no matter how much truth there may be in that, no matter how important it may be to enunciate those truths at one time, at a particular time, there's always more to the mystery of the divine than anything we can put into words. We got to realize that. But I'm afraid everybody has talked about the mysteries and all the, the Futuhat al-Makkiyah was, vast. I think it's maybe 12 volumes of Sufi secrets that were written by Ibn al-Arabi under direct inspiration, as he said, by Allah. And, it's a vast, ocean of mysteries. And some people have said, though, well, the Futuhat al-Makkiyah, this great work of Sufi mysteries, it's only for the Arifs, for the Gnostics, for the ones who inherently know the spiritual truth. And on the other hand, the Arifs don't need to read it in the book because they already know it. Whereas for everybody else, you'll never figure it out. So why was this book ever written? Some people say that perhaps kind of tongue in cheek, but that does show one of the paradoxes of trying to talk about the divine mysteries. So.
Right, and you kind of also juxtapose the kind of authentic perennialism of your view against this whole kind of new global order, this new global one world religion, this drive to. Can you talk about that?
Well, yeah. If you look into the interfaith movement and of who has been behind the interfaith movement is not, just various religious believers deciding they want to get along better and phoning each other up and says, let's have a potluck and talk about and just get to know each other. There's a lot of money and influence coming from governments, corporations, think tanks, to have an influence in the interfaith movement because the global elites understand, that if billions of people are under the, basically they're getting their whole worldview and their morality and their imperatives of action from this religion. I mean, how can the global elites who want to rule the world, how can they let that religion alone? They got to control it because it controls, as far as they see, the mentality of billions of people. So hey, we can't let these religions just operate on their own. And so there's a great attempt to co-opt the religions on every conceivable level. You can see that
I
in the
mean,
Catholic Church.
the Christian religion here in the States, to me, is just completely co-opted. I mean,
well, I mean, in different ways.
Yeah.
There's a certain co-optation that went down with Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council with the Catholic Church, and then of course, that they're the, evangelical political groups, who are following a lot of money that's coming in, but it even goes. I mean, that the intelligence agencies. I think that the CIA has got at least one guy in every Sufi order, of which there are many in the world, and in every esoteric organization in the world. The spy agencies love esoteric organizations because, especially if they're international, they're semi-clandestine, and they follow their leader, their sheikh, or their guru, implicitly. And so this makes these organizations very useful to the spy agencies because, they can travel, throughout the world and recognize each other with a secret handshake or whatever it is. And if they can, place a sheikh or a guru in a particular organization, then what, he can spread his orders throughout his whole network around the world. And boy, just think how spies can use that, both for gathering information and for spreading particular ideas or attitudes that the powers that be want to spread throughout the world. Now, I'm not saying that's what all these groups are, but this is what organizations like the CIA or British intelligence or Russian intelligence would like those groups to be.
Right, no doubt.
Yeah. So it's there's an awful lot of interference with and attempt to control the religions, more than people can conceive of usually, unless they've looked at it. So that the way this works, two of the ways this works, in like North America and Western Europe, you will have an interfaith movement that says, let all the religions come together and be friends and smile at each other and shake hands and have events together, and let them not proselytize, and let them not emphasize their major doctrines. Let the Christians not emphasize the divinity of Christ, because that will offend the Muslims, and let the Muslims not emphasize the uncreated nature of the Quran, because that will get under the Christian skin. So we just, any doctrines that are really central to the uniqueness of those religions need to be soft pedaled, because the idea that prevents conflict and prevents, bad feeling and bad blood. So the religions get together and work to weaken each other in order to get along. That's one thing that happens. The same people that are sponsoring that kind of interfaith movement, when it comes to other areas outside Western Europe and North America, when it comes to the Muslim world and plenty of other places in the world, what is done is conflict is fomented deliberately by the same people who want to bring interfaith peace in the homeland, outside in the quasi-colonial hinterlands. They want to create conflict between the religions with false flag operations and everything you can imagine. I was giving this view in 2013 at our local mosque here in Lexington, Kentucky, because we were starting what came to be an international Muslim interfaith peace movement called the Covenants Initiative, which I can talk about a little later. Anyway, I was starting that, and we were starting that, and I was giving this idea to some of the people in the mosque, and then someone spoke up who was undoubtedly Pakistani, because he had accent from the Indian subcontinent. He says, I know what you mean, because in my hometown, there would be these nights in which someone, we don't know who, would throw a slaughtered cow into a Hindu temple. Those cows are sacred to Hindus, right? And a slaughtered pig into a Muslim mosque, because pigs are considered to be unclean animals to the Muslims. And he said, predictably, like clockwork, the next day there would be Hindu-Muslim riots. Now, if you think about it, there would be no reason for either the Hindus or the Muslims to do that. Obviously, it has to be third parties that want to create conflict between those religions. And this has been a method of colonialism for a long time. It was used by the British in India, which is to create conflict between the religions so they do not get together and turn against the colonial administration.
Right.
They fight each other, they're not going to be fighting the British, you know.
Right. It's almost like the contest today against the global elites really was the British colonialists were the global elites of that time, right? Maybe
and
early 19th century, early 20th century.
We inherited ISIS and people like that, the Wahhabis. We inherited those from British intelligence. They were supporting the Wahhabis, who later became, through various changes, it became ISIS and Al Qaeda. They were supporting them before World War I as an insurgency against the Ottoman Empire. And so the whole method of doing that, and a lot of the contacts and a lot of the, the whole package that later became, and there was U.S. support for ISIS, certainly, that became that we inherited from the British. So.
Right. And our attitudes were the very same. The U.S., a lot of those things that happened after 2001 were very much false flags, definitely trying to rile up civilizational war. They talk about it, Huntington, all these characters. And some of those conflicts, the religious conflicts there between the Muslims and the Hindus, were some of the most savage attacks. Nothing like even in Western Europe, like just bloodshed, led to Pakistan and India actually being created.
Now they're both, nuclear powers too. So
and still kind of similar, still have that animosity towards each other. Yeah. So it's just one of these ideas of like how these conflicts are manipulated. Unless people think that these religions are always fighting against each other, there's internal conflicts too. You can talk about the 100 Years' War or some of the internal Muslim Sharia Sunni conflicts.
There's been a huge amount of internal conflict within Islam, definitely. What's interesting is the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, when he and the Muslims decided or were told by Allah that they were now allowed to leave Medina and go somewhere else where they weren't being persecuted, because they were seriously persecuted in Medina. So they said, well, we need to find somewhere else to go. And there was an oasis called Yathrib, which later became Medina. And the people who lived at Yathrib went to the Prophet and said, come and rule over us, because we are, various religions. We're Jews. I think there were some Christians. We're, pagans and this, and we're always fighting. So what we need is a law and a lawgiver from the outside to come in and make peace between us. And this is hard for us to imagine. Why would anybody ask a lawgiver to come and lay down the law? Well, in earlier times, it was understood that chaos was a problem. Chaos and constant conflict, like we're getting in this country now, was not freedom and was not a good way to live. And there needed to be an outside or objective or higher law that could say, okay, everybody lay down your arms. This is the law. And it had to be somebody from outside, that locale, because in those days, everybody was in a tribe. And if you killed somebody from another tribe, that whole tribe had to go to war with your tribe. And so you had feuds which would go on and on and on. There was no way under the tribal system to get out of that, unless another element was introduced. And some of the tribes people got tired of the constant killing each other. Now they killed my cousin. Now I have to go kill some of them. Let's do it a different way. So they invited the prophet to come in, and he did this amazing document called the Constitution of Medina, which was incredibly advanced, and it gave equal rights to all the religions. It gave rights to women that they didn't have before, and according to some scholars, Muhammad had set things up, and this did not work out. He had set things up so if his sunnah, if his way of doing things, and if his rulings had been followed by the Muslims, in a few generations, slavery would have disappeared, because all the slaves would have been freed. It's not like emancipation at one time, which is another way to do it. It certainly created problems when it was done in this country, but that's a way to do it. And another way to do it is to say, this is how slavery will slowly die by attrition. So some scholars will say that's what his intent was. So anyway, and also Muhammad made amazing treaties called the Covenants. Covenants with mostly Christian communities, but also Jewish communities, Zoroastrian communities, peoples of the book. What he wanted to do in Medina is create a federation of the different religions and different peoples of the book they considered to be, those who had true revelations. That was his initial intent. You could see how it didn't work finally, because of internal dissension, because of external attack. But what we did with the Covenants Initiative, Dr. John Andrew Morrow is the author of a book called The Covenants of the Prophet Muhammad with the Christians of the World. And he did amazing research on retranslating, rediscovering, and the treaties that Muhammad made with the different religious groups of his time. And they're so, especially with the Christians, they are so generous, and they show such a sense of spiritual brotherhood with the Christians, although very clearly saying we're not Christians. We don't do what the Christians do. We don't believe in that Jesus was the Son of God, and yet the Christians believe in God, and so they are our brothers, even if we differ on a point as important as that. So this was all in the covenants, and these covenants sort of went down in Muslim history, and they became documents which later administrations drew upon. Finally, they became the basis of the official policy of the Ottoman Empire toward religious minorities. And so they were certainly not always followed. Very often they were violated. But when they were violated, they still existed for the people who felt that they were being mistreated, to say, look, here are the covenants. Let's return to what our prophet wanted. And sometimes that worked. That's the best you can say. But so
it minimized conflict, definitely minimized conflict. I think you had to pay the jizya, you had to kind of pay a tax, right? But there was there was like some communities thought they had it good in the Middle East that weren't Muslims under the Muslims because they got protected. They just paid a tax. Some Jews, especially in the Middle Ages, I think in Spain, if I remember correctly. Well, like the Christians made sure the Jews had to forcibly convert, which I don't think the Muslims.
Yeah, I mean, when the Jews were expelled from Spain and when they were expelled from Europe, where did they go? They went to the Ottoman Empire, who would accept them and let them be Jews, which was basically under the theory first enunciated in the Prophet's Covenants. So.
Right, and isn't that really the gist of this book, is really to get back to that point where these covenants can work together and the religions can dial back the conflict.
Well, and the idea that the religions do not understand sufficiently that they are all under attack by the same forces of globalization. Now, what you see with what Russia wants to do, if indeed Putin is following the theories put forward by Alexander Dugin, his court philosopher, is do something with the religions a bit more like the Ottoman Empire, which is keep the religions in separate ghettos. I mean, these were called millets in the Ottoman Empire, and the positive aspect of these were the religion within that community was allowed its entire tradition, and it did not have to curtail its tradition at all. But it was not looked, the idea of the religions proselytizing was not looked upon very positively, because the religions were supposed to keep to themselves, and so they became it's one of the reasons they became so ethnically ethnically identified, is because of that tendency to want to keep the religions separate. So what I'm seeing in the works of Alexander Dugin is he's envisioning something like that too. The problem is you see under the Soviet system, and this is, I'm sure, true under the present system of Russia today, is whatever religions are allowed to operate. And as far as I know, this may not be the whole list, but according to the Russian Constitution, the established religions are Eastern Orthodox Christianity, not Catholicism, not evangelical Christianity, Eastern Orthodox, Buddhism, Islam, and shamanism. And there may be another one I forgot. Judaism. Yeah, these religions are accepted and allowed within the Russian Federation, but without doubt, the patriarchs and the chief rabbis and whoever are the leaders of these religions are either appointed by the state or very much under the power of the state. So the different religions are heavily controlled by the state, but allowed as sort of a domestic freedom. So this is not ideal either.
So what's your idea? What's your ideal? What do you think?
Well, in the West, what we have is a major attack on religion in so many ways. The Catholic Church lost most of its substance during Vatican II, which is essentially, this is what the globalist powers that be wanted out of the Catholic Church, and they got it. They reformed the church according to their image of what would be useful to them, and this required Catholicism to jettison a number of its most central doctrines and even its morality. So the Muslims wouldn't go along with that, and so they had to be broken down with military action. This is what the globalists are doing to the religions, and we can include the Chinese. This is another kind of globalism. We're going to have a Sino-Russian globalism as opposed to a Western globalism, but it's all globalism of one kind or another. And of course, the Chinese got rid of the Tibetan Buddhists. They are going after the Uyghur Muslims. Now there's a worry that the Christians, particularly the Catholics, are going to be persecuted in China. Pope Francis made this terrible concession to the Chinese government, saying, okay, the Chinese Communist government will have the right to appoint Catholic bishops. Will that satisfy them? No. That was just, give them an inch, and now they're taking the mile. And, we're going to see a lot of persecution of Christians as well as Muslims in China.
And there's hundreds of millions of Christians in China too. So
yeah.
It's a significant part of the population.
Yeah. So what we have, at least in the West, at least in North America, the religions need to understand that they have common enemies, and not just communist China. Certainly, communist China is not our first problem here. It's a problem here. It's not our first problem. That the enemies of religion are liberal ecumenism, which destroys all the particularity and uniqueness of the religions, militant secularism, militant atheism, which says religion is bunk,
Right.
and
why do you believe it and I hate you, right? Like you're not allowed to have it. That's the whole militancy of it.
You're not allowed to have
right. Separate beliefs, whatever, like their Darwinism or whatever.
Well, I just saw an article on the computer which said, recently 10% fewer people than the last time they took the poll in the United States now believe in God, which is a big drop in like a short time. But there was an article which said one of the reasons for this is that people are not following what science is seeing. I mean, more and more scientists are seeing there's got to be something like a creator. There's got to be something like intelligent design. I mean, really, Darwinism isn't as solid on its throne as it used to be, and more scientists are beginning to question classical Darwinism and are beginning to look at after all, if we're finding that reality is essentially information more than it is little particles of matter, it's actually information. And once you get information, you have to say, well, where did the information come from? If there's a book, who wrote the book? And more scientists are, from their different standpoints, coming to ask questions like this. But this has not filtered through to the populace, because you have Neil deGrasse Tyson and people
right.
like that.
Bill Nye, right?
Yeah, are just maintaining sort of the old scientific ideology, which is really getting on shaky ground these days. So and then of course the other danger to religions is when people who have a deep faith but not a very wide perspective feel that their religion is being threatened, then they become militant, and that they look at the other religions as enemies, which certainly the globalists will support that view, because never are the religions supposed to look together and saying, wait a minute, the globalists are common enemies. They want all of us to disappear. It's much easier to say, look at those people at mosque over there. Those are your enemies. And see, or look at the people in the synagogue or the church. Those are your enemies. That's the way people think, unfortunately, because it's very hard to get a comprehensive view of what's going on in a crazy world like this. But what I'm saying is the religions need to recognize common enemies and just say, let's not look at each other even to try to get along, much less to hate each other. Let's look together at the forces that we all have to contend with that are attacking all of us. And that will give us a real basis for alliance without having to try to homogenize all our doctrines. And
right. They're going to homogenize us all into this model of the WEF. That's really what they're trying to do through undercutting religion, any religion. They will make sure that you are a kind of neo-feudal slave, never own anything, and eat bugs, and your life has no meaning, and they'll tell you you're happy. So they'll propagandize you. That's really that enemy. That's really what religion fights against. Either from a Christian perspective, probably, and I'm not a Muslim, probably from a Muslim perspective, even Judaism, it's antagonistic to that globalization, New World Order, neo-feudalism.
Yeah, and if there were any way for the religions to get together and see that they have in the globalists one form or another of globalism truly a common enemy, then there would be a basis for real mutual action without having to soft pedal their doctrines or because you get these interfaith events, they're so exhausting. Everybody gets together. Well, here is Imam so and so of such a mosque, and here's Rabbi so and here's Father so and so from the diocese, and they get together and they smile and they talk to each other and they shake hands, and it's exhausting because nothing is happening.
Nothing's no mutual kind of
action
together.
Wake up. And one of the things, going back to my UFO book, one of the things that I wish the religions would understand in common is that there's a huge push from governments, from the corporate world, from the military, from the intelligence community to purvey the myth that we were not created by God, we were created by the UFO aliens, by genetic engineering. We are their lab rats. And, there are people, this is something that the polls asking about religion don't ask. I wish they would ask, what's more likely, we're created by God, whoever that is, or could we have been created by aliens through genetic engineering? I would like to see how that plays out in numbers, because there might be a lot of people who sort of believe in God, but saying, but how the hell did he do it? He had to have had, so maybe he hired the aliens to concoct us in a test tube or something. Who knows what people actually believe nowadays? But
no, it's a great question. You talk about postmodernism in this book too, and you can see that attack on religion has created almost a new character, especially in the West. These kind of postmodern that don't have an attachment to the ideas, where like even the Muslim, very, very, very strong gender distinctions in the Islamic world, pretty much in the traditional Christian world. A lot of that's like that's the vacuum that's being filled without that religion. You see that vacuum; it's terrifying. It's terrifying.
Oh yeah, I mean, actually, there's a line in the Quran. I forget the chapter and the surah and verse, but it says, and Allah created all things in pairs that haply ye might reflect. I mean, what does it mean that all things appear in pairs, even night and day? Man and woman, night and day. Sea and land. I mean, it's absolutely everywhere. Negative charge, positive charge. What does this mean? And essentially, what the Quran is saying is only God is one. God is unity. Only God is one. Everything else, if it manifests at all, if it appears at all, appears as two. It appeared because polarity is the basis of manifestation. It's like if there's no figure ground, if nothing stands out as a figure from the ground, which is its background, it doesn't appear. It doesn't exist. In Latin, the word exist means to stand forth as real, as existing. And that it's such a basic concept. So if you don't want to have a gender, you essentially don't really want to exist. It's a step toward non-existence. It's like a slow suicide.
It's really bad. Yeah, it's really amazing. Like just abandoning that, and it's incredible. Like this is like somewhere in the left. That's okay. They can't. Woman isn't really a woman. They can't define women. Really scary. There is actually kind of a curious Crowley. I'm pretty familiar with Aleister Crowley, but he, I think, was Kumaraswamy's wife. One of his wives was Crowley's lover and had his child. Miscarried. And Dugan is a Crowley, really kind of likes Crowley. He's recited some of Crowley's poetry, so I know that he's there.
Yeah.
And that religion
I
is like the Luciferian religion of the globe. Yeah, sorry.
I found places in Dugan's books where he essentially makes an overture to perhaps the Satanists, to perhaps the Frankists among the Jews,
Sabbateans, yeah, Sabbateans.
and where he addresses Edom. He says, "Arise, Edom! Come. This is what the prophets of old said. They said, 'Arise, Edom.'" No, they didn't. They said, "Arise, Israel." Edom was Israel's enemy.
Enemy, right?
And Edom, in the Kabbalah, the guardian angel or the guardian spirit of Edom was Samael, who is essentially Satan. So you have little, secret overtures to possibly the Jewish Frankists and possibly Satanists, in Dugan, a word to the wise, and the people who are following him say, he's talking to us,
Right. And you make a distinction in your book, at least in the intro, between this view of perennialism and Evola, Bannon. So it kind of puts the context of this book within present day global religion and philosophy, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. So,
well, anything you'd like to add, Charles? Fascinating conversation. Love to have you back. Love to talk with you.
To talk about the part of the book, which is the Antinomianism of Frithjof Schuon. We'll just say antinomianism. What does that mean? That means that the higher spiritual caste, the elect, the chosen ones, don't have to obey the law. They're beyond the law. They're beyond good and evil. And Schuon didn't actually say he or anyone could be beyond good and evil, because he very correctly said, to be beyond good and evil is not to be in a mixture of good and evil. To be beyond good and evil is to be in the sovereign good, because God is beyond good and evil, not because he's neither one, but because he's all good and he has no counterpart. He has no shadow. He is absolute good. So this is a wonderful thing to say. But then, in his practice, there are various, he did not follow the Muslim Sharia, although he said everybody has to follow it if you're going to be a Muslim or a Sufi. He himself really didn't follow it. And he has, there are problems like this which have caused a lot of disturbance in people who were so deeply inspired by his books, and then got to where they saw how he operated and say, well, what does this mean? So what I'm trying
that's the definition of antinomianism, right? Anti-law.
Yeah, antinomianism is nomos is law or norm. You don't have to follow the law because this is what the Gnostics of late antiquity would say. We since we have spiritual knowledge, we don't have to follow conventional morality. Okay, and that's Schuon not only his nude dance events, but he had 4 wives, which he claimed, this is according to the Sharia, because Muslims are allowed to have 4 wives. 4 wives. Well, fine, that's correct. The problem is some of these women were married to other men at the time. The Sharia does not look very happily.
Right, but what you're saying is that he was selectively implementing the Sharia, right?
Yeah,
I'll take a little piece of that. And
he thought he was truly the exception, because he was quite impressed with his very impressive intellect and his very impressive spiritual, insight. And he just said, wow, no one's ever known this. This is incredible. I must be, God knows what I am. I must be the great Bodhisattva, the seal of the sages, he would call himself.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
You said he was a great metaphysician, like one of the greatest.
But you got to see his errors, because man, he's got a few errors, but they're very strong. They're very powerful, and very, very, very dangerous. Actually, what I'm looking for is a willingness on the part of Schuon's followers to say he was not. Basically, he could make errors. He was not infallible. If you say he's not infallible and yet he was a great metaphysician, then beautiful. Then there can be real learning can continue to come from him, because you can look and you see, well, there are the contradictions in his writing, but you can't understand those contradictions until you really learn his perspective. You have to absorb his wisdom, and then you'll see where he himself contradicts that wisdom. Which is a very funny. If you're looking for somebody to believe in rather than somebody to learn from, don't go to Frithjof Schuon. Whereas if you're looking for somebody to learn from, he will be an amazing resource. So I want to end by just reading this half page, which
great, please do.
These are 4 of the contradictions, and I want to throw this out to people who follow Schuon or who have been influenced by Schuon, and just say, well, how do you answer these things? Because maybe I don't understand. Maybe somebody can enlighten me in saying, oh, well, you see, you think this is a problem, but really he meant this. Then I'll say, oh, I didn't see it that way. I'm willing to learn, but also I'm not willing to pull back my challenges, because that's how we're going to learn from this guy at this point in time. So 4 contradictions. Contradiction 1, in his book From the Divine to the Human, Schuon says, a given religion in reality sums up all religions. All religion is to be found in a given religion because truth is one, thereby clearly rejecting syncretism. This is what I talked about before. Yet in his own practice, he certainly incorporated syncretism, replacing, to take only one example, the Muslim call to prayer, the adhan, with a Lakota invocation of Wakantanka. What do you say about this? Because that's obviously, not in line with the Sharia, right? And if every religion has everything you need, why do you have to mix them? Okay, contradiction 2. In his book, Gnosis, Divine Wisdom, he says, one can love something false without love ceasing to be what it is. In other words, it is possible to have a true love for a false object, a demon, for example. Yet elsewhere, he rails against the error of sincerism, which is a wonder. I love that line, that term. He rails against the error of sincerism, which holds that subjective sincerity of feeling and belief can obviate the limitations of objective error. What do you say about this? I mean, if we're sincere, if we believe, and if we care, and if we see something as beautiful, then it is beautiful, even if it's really ugly, or if we see it as true, it's really true, even if it's not true.
Even if it's not, right.
And so it's like he's playing both sides here. He himself is not following his own critique of sincerism, as I see it. Contradiction 3, also in Gnosis, Divine Wisdom, he says, in contradiction to every pertinent religious teaching I am aware of from any tradition, error always implies a privation of knowledge. Privation, a lack of imperfection. Error always implies a privation of knowledge, whereas sin does not imply a privation of will. Yet in his system of the 6 themes that appears in Stations of Wisdom, his book Stations of Wisdom, he includes purity and spiritual combat as 2 of the indispensable dimensions of the spiritual life. Purity from sin, combat against sin, both of which undeniably require a strong and dedicated will to resist temptation, a will that will certainly be weakened if temptation triumphs. What do you say about this?
They contradict.
Yeah, and contradiction 4. Now, as I understand traditionalism and of Schuon and René Guénon, every religion is true in its own terms. Now, that's what I thought I was being taught, but other people talked about, well, really, Schuon would damn Christianity with faint praise. He would also damn Islam with faint praise. What he really liked was the Vedanta. But anyway, this is his own his own foibles. Okay. So anyway, contradiction 4, first pointed out to be by Rama Kumaraswamy, who's the son of Ananda Kandish Kumaraswamy. He became, he was a follower of Schuon. He became a traditional Catholic priest. And he was an interesting, very interesting guy. He was Mother Teresa's cardiologist.
Oh, interesting.
And then he became, his health began to suffer, and he had bone cancer, which lasted forever, and he would get remissions, and he would come back, and so he figured he could not be a surgeon anymore, so he quit, and he retrained as a psychiatrist, and he was ordained as a traditional Catholic priest, and he worked as an exorcist along with Father Malachi Martin in the New York area for some time. So, interesting guy. So this is something that he pointed out to me. He says, look at what Schuon says here. So in Stations of Wisdom, the book Stations of Wisdom, Schuon says, orthodoxy is the principle of formal homogeneity proper to any authentically spiritual perspective. It is therefore an indispensable aspect of all genuine spirituality. And that's what I understand perennialism or of the traditionalist school to be based upon, is an idea like that. But then, in Logic and Transcendence, another book, he denies the Eucharist, the central orthodox mystery of Christianity, by saying, quote, if in truth the Eucharistic species have literally become the flesh and blood of Jesus, how much better off are we for this, so to say, magical operation, given that the value of this flesh and this blood lies in its divine content, and that this same content can penetrate the bread and the wine without any transubstantiation. What do you say about this? Now here, I mean, at that point, he's no different from any, whether it be Protestant or whether it be atheist, who thinks that what the priest does during Mass or during the divine liturgy, to consecrate the bread and wine and transform them into the body and blood of Christ, is all a bunch of hocus pocus. In fact, hocus pocus, you may or may not know, is a phrase that was taken from the Latin words of consecration, hoc est in corpus meum, this is my body. And then those who wanted to poke fun at this stupid Catholic idea that the priest could transform the
wine and bread into the actual blood and body.
Yeah. So they reduced that to hocus pocus, which became words used by stage magicians. So which is a satire. So here, Schuon is no different from any atheist or anti-Catholic Protestant who sneers at the central mystery of the Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches. Now, how can you be a traditionalist and do that? You can't.
See, right, that's the whole center of the Mass, right? That's why they do the Mass over and over again.
That's what the Mass is that's all what the Mass is leading up to, and that's the essence of the Mass. So he just says, well, he had his brother was a monk, a Catholic monk, and I think there was some sibling rivalry going on for many decades. But
so he's not consistent. That's really the point. So to turn Schuon into some all-knowing, somebody you can't criticize is a mistake.
Yeah, that's that means, and if you can't criticize him, then all your learning from him stops at one point, because you can't even look at what he says with intelligence, which in criticism, put the potential of criticism is one aspect of intelligence. You can't look at what he says intelligently. You just said, you might as well, just put his books under glass and pray before them instead of reading them.
But didn't in his personal life, didn't he kind of want that guru status?
Oh,
so
yes, he did. He did.
He wouldn't be the only one.
If you want to know the story of Frithjof Schuon, look up Maud, M-A-U-D-E, Murray, M-U-R-R-A-Y, who's the last of his wives who was alive, who was cast out at one point because she didn't go along with things at one point. And she's now living in Pakistan, but she's got a website that tells, and she is also struggling with what a great metaphysician he was, but how, she has now found a different Sufi stream, and
I actually came across a video of her when I was doing some background work research today. So there he is.
Yeah, I mean, I have somewhere.
Oh, there she is. Sorry.
Gave it away. That was some video I saw years ago when she was quite young, when she just when the scandals had just happened, and she was sort of out in the cold, a poor girl having been raised in a cult, and now she didn't know how to balance a checkbook out in the world, that kind of thing. So.
And here's Sayed Hossein Nasr, who you mentioned earlier. So these guys, you can kind of see the intellectual environment Schuon was in, right? Some of these characters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Schuon brought together an amazing group of people, and his intellectual achievement was mammoth, was amazing. And, and Titus Burckhardt and Martin Lings and people like that are almost of the same stature. And Sayed Hossein Nasr, who's also done wonderful work, but he wasn't infallible. That's all I want to establish. I hate to quote somebody from the Gurdjieff tradition because I don't, there are a lot of problems with Gurdjieff.
Yeah, we can criticize him all day.
Yeah, but there's one of his followers, J.G. Bennett, who said a very good thing, which he says, when a guru, a spiritual leader passes on, his followers divide into three groups. The first group are those who are just waiting for the old goat to kick the bucket so they could go off and do whatever they wanted. The second group are those, who are the true believers who preserve every word and every, aspect of the teacher's, life, even his most, accidental and surface aspects. They will, put his eyeglasses and his dentures under glass, and venerate them in this, And then there's a group that Bennett called the near heretics. He said the near heretics are those who really carry on the master's teaching, who don't fall into the camp of the rebels who totally reject him, and don't fall into the camp of the true believers who venerate him to the point where they can no longer learn from him. So I would hope that I would be in the third category. So.
I think so. I think after reading your book, you spend a very solid amount of that book criticizing and analyzing and comparing and saying what you liked and what you didn't. So
yeah,
it seems like you didn't get that.
There are people. I mean, I found a group. There's a WhatsApp group called Spiritual Lessons, and these are a lot of these people. They're pretty much followers of Schuon. I don't know if they're all initiates in his Mariamia Tarika, but Schuon and that stream of traditionalism. Certainly, they're the basis of what they're doing, except they become a lot more Muslim than he was, which is, we can thank Sayed Hossein Nasr and Martin Lings for, re-Islamicizing his Sufi order as insofar as they could. But, I said one of these contradictions to them and said, what do you think about this? And the leader of the group, Hassan Ahwan, said, I've had problems with this myself. I think your point is well taken. So we realized, hey, there are a lot of people who are still following Schuon, but don't consider him to be infallible. And so this is hopeful, Right.
Charles, always great to talk with you. Is there anything you'd like to add? I mean, you kind of went through the kind of 4 contradictions that he had. Anything like that? Your website is still the same one from our last discussion.
It's the same one.
It's Charles-Upton.
Yeah, my web mistress said she can't do it anymore, so I'm going to figure out how to post things myself. So it may take a while, but it's still there. So
still there. So if anybody has any questions or anything, they can reach out to you there, right? That's the
yes. And I just want to say, at the beginning of my book, which is the way forward for perennialism after the Antinomianism of Frithjof Schuon, my publisher James Wetmore put a little note where he said this is the first in what he wanted to call the Dialogos series. So he imagines if enough people who are interested in these issues and know about Schuon and have opinions on Schuon would like to get back and criticize positively or negatively anything in my book, and actually negative criticism would be more fruitful. And I want to just say, I liked it. I want somebody to say, I think you missed this point, right? Because out of that, something fruitful can come. So he says, if I and he and or he receive enough material of good enough quality, critical of my book, that he's willing to publish another book.
Interesting.
So,
you've published all under the name of the perennial name, right? Sophia.
Well, right? I just, I don't know. I wanted to get to bigger presses, but then, I looked around and you need a literary agent. And then I discovered that in order to get a literary agent, you need a literary agent.
Right.
I mean, if you don't have a bunch of money to put up front, you're not going to get very far. So I pretty much stayed with James Wetmore, although if any large press, with a mass audience wants to publish me, oh yeah, connect with me.
Yeah, charles-upton.com.
Yeah,
you can check it out.
Now I'm getting a lot more, offers of interviews. That there's a couple of Muslim comedians. I'm not going to give their names because I'll get them wrong, but they're Muslim. They're Arabs, but they're Americanized. They're living in this country. They're comedians, and they want to interview me. And I don't know what the hell they're going to do. They say once we interview you, we'll you have to let us do a lot of heavy editing. So they'll take little, passages or little routines for me and stick them God knows where. So I'm in other words, people, I'm now coming out for some reason.
Let's go. I mean, your book, the Alien Disclosure Deception was excellent. I highly recommend that book. I think you solidified, in my mind, the UFOs are the same as the old kind of, demonic events.
The fairy folk.
Right. The same as those, just in some other variants. And it's out today. I'm looking at all of these stuff on Twitter today. These same characters are out there, Elizondo, Lazar. So these kind of UFO discussions are still.
Oh yeah, well, it's getting bigger.
It's getting bigger. You're right.
It what's wonderful about it is it helps us forget about the Ukraine. Anything to forget about the Ukraine. Let's think about Trump, abortion, UFOs.
Right. So, I highly recommend that book. I know that Jason, Jason Horsley mentioned you a lot. He quotes the System of Antichrist in one of his other books. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I reached out to you originally. But I will not edit this, so I'll leave this whole thing here. The audio will stay the same. And it's great to talk to you. So knowledgeable. This book really reflects years. I don't think I give you credit for accruing a lot of that information. I really had to stop and kind of look up terms.
Yeah, I've been writing that for years and years. And, and it just, there was no context in which to say that stuff. Because in earlier years, if you criticized Schuon, you would be typed as a detractor and an enemy, And so I says, I'm going to hang in there. I don't want to do something so I'm going to be, kicked out of the fold. So I'm just going to hang in until the time comes when it's ripe for criticizing Schuon without just panning him, So that time has finally come, I think. Oh, there's going to be a conference at Notre Dame University in Indiana in October on perennialism and whether perennialism is still relevant, which is very, so you'll have definitely people identified with perennialism, followers of Schuon, Syed Hossein Nasr, Reza Shah Kazemi, Harry Oldmeadow, and then you have other academics who are going to say, perennialism has shot its wad, it's not relevant anymore. So this could be very interesting. So, and so
do you remember the name of it? It's at what school again? Did you say?
It's in Notre Dame University, Indiana. So I'm going to be speaking there through Zoom. Some people are Zooming. Some people are coming in on airplanes.
So there will be some live stuff, and that's in September, right?
It's in October.
October, sorry.
So look for it. I wish I had the URL for it, but look for it. You'll find it.
Cool. And if you want to send me that link, I can put it in the show notes once this.
Yeah, I will look it up and I'll send it to you.
Awesome. Well, we're at 90 minutes. I got to run out. Again, title of this book is The Way Forward for Perennialism After the Antinomianism of Frithjof Schuon. And the author, again, is Charles Upton. Just published June 21st, 2022. So thanks so much for your time, Charles.
Glad to be back.
All right, cool. Take care.